Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Thank you for stopping by. If you haven't looked at your calendar recently or at least stepped inside any sort of retail store, you might not know it is the beginning of the spooky, whatever you want to call it, season, and it's my favorite time of the year. And I love all things spooky and horror, and I mean, you've seen the title. You are probably very intrigued about my connection to two very prolific Pacific Northwest serial killers. You're probably wondering, wait a minute. You're too young to be connected to these two serial killers, and you're probably wondering what two serial killers I'm talking about, and that would be, of course, Ted Bundy and Gary Ridgway, aka the Green River serial killer. Both have very high body counts in Washington state, where I'm from. I'm not gonna go into depths of their specific cases, maybe a few details here or there that are relevant to my personal story time of connections to the scariness, because there are multiple videos out there explaining all the things that they have done and their basic history. And so I highly recommend you check out those channels. I know Bailey Sarian, who is one of my favorites, has a really great video about Ted Bundy. And well, without further ado, let's get started. How am I, Vivian, Vive Loot, connected to Ted Bundy and Gary Ridgway? And I will tell you, it would be my Uncle Bob, aka Robert Keppel. And one of the reasons I'm doing this video today is because over the summer we actually lost Uncle Bob. I'm really kind of sad about it. I haven't seen him in a while because, and I will get into that, but I just recently found out. So this is in honor of Uncle Bob and all of his hard work to basically put these two horrible men in prison. So let's get started with some basic information about Uncle Bob. And no, I am not blood related, but we will get into that. Robert Keppel, born June 15th, 1944 in Spokane, Washington, recently passed away, like I said, 14th, 2021 due to old age, not COVID, which he was a lifelong Bellevue resident. Robert Keppel grew up in Spokane, Washington, and went to Central Valley High School, where he excelled in sports. So he went on to Washington State University, where he excelled in the high jump and track, clearing 7 feet and actually qualified for the US Olympic trials. He then went to earn not only his bachelor's, but his master's degree, police science, around the late 60s. He then was hired by the King County's Sheriff Department, which is kind of the Seattle to Kent, if you know where, kind of not Tacoma, but kind of along that area of the Olympic Peninsula. He was assigned as this rookie homicide detective to the case of 2 missing girls in Lake Sammamish, which is where we kind of follow into the Ted Bundy area. This is kind of a prolific case with the fact that 2 women, Denise Naslund, I probably said that wrong, and Janice Ott went missing. This is a big one because one person kind of got away from Ted Bundy because of the fact that he was like faking putting an arm on his cast, put a canoe on his VW Bug, and trying to lure women in to try and figure out like, hey, I need help getting my canoe off my boat. Can you help me? Like 1 or 2 women were a little smarter than he would thought and was like, well, if you got it on your boat, you don't need help getting it off. But unfortunately, 2 women did go missing and lost their life. It was from these people who basically heard about a guy named Ted with this VW Bug that Uncle Bob, Robert Keppel, was able to deduce some pretty clear information about Ted Bundy via this VW Bug and a guy named Ted. Basically, with very little information, he was able to, via registration, like vehicle registrations and just the name Ted, he was able to narrow it down to a psychology student at the University of Washington named Ted Bundy. It wasn't till, very long decades of work. Eventually Ted Bundy was caught, and again, go watch an actual video. Uncle Bob spent a lot of his career trying to catch down Ted Bundy, and eventually he did. He then went to work with the Washington Attorney General's office in their criminal division and was a founding member of this criminal division in the early 80s, which actually now is named after Uncle Bob. He worked under very high-profile cases and homicides within the Pacific Northwest under this division, and then based on all of his expertise, Uncle Bob created HITS. HITS stands for Homicide Investigation Tracking Systems. And I'm reading this off of my laptop in the corner just so I get this correctly, so bear with me. HITS is a massive database of information contributed by law enforcement agencies about violent crimes and enables agencies to look for signatures or markers that might link one seemingly buried crime to another. And I will say, and we'll get to how I'm connected here in a bit, everyone talks so highly of Robert Keppel because of the work he did. And then, lo and behold, the 90s. As I've got my notes on my computer, the 90s happened, and guess what? Women started disappearing again. Ted Bundy was caught. He knew of Robert Keppel. They actually kind of had a few conversations while he was awaiting trial and his execution. And in the 80s and the 90s, women started going missing again. Mind you, around the SeaTac area and the Green River, aka the Green River Killer. And where did I grow up? I actually grew up not that far from the actual Green River. And mind you, a lot of the bodies that were found from Gary Ridgway were near the SeaTac area, which is, SeaTac is the airport area. SeaTac stands for Seattle Tacoma International Airport, but they have their own little town. When I was in elementary school, before they even caught Gary Ridgway, they didn't know a whole lot about like who, what, where. Being that I lived super close to the Green River, we had escorts to school. There was always a buddy system. We had security at recesses, and it was mostly for the protection of the female staff. They wanted to make extra sure, since we lived super close to the Green River, and that is where a lot of the bodies were dumped and everything like that. But how does Robert Keppel connect with the Green River Killer? As prolific as Uncle Bob was, they wanted help. They were having trouble catching Gary Ridgway. So Uncle Bob was actually brought in as a consultant on the Green River murders. Recently just found out, because I was young. I was very young. Actually, I was born in '89 and Ted Bundy was executed a month or two after I was born. But before all that happened, a lot of these bodies were still disappearing. So not only was Uncle Bob a consultant on the Green River killings, surprisingly, just found this out in my research that Ted Bundy was writing letters to Robert Keppel, to Uncle Bob, with insight about how to catch the Green River Killer. These letters with insight and this correspondence led Uncle Bob to go down to Florida, I think, where Ted Bundy was being held. And they had conversations about how to catch Gary Ridgway. This was huge. This was absolutely huge that Ted Bundy was helping catch the Green River Killer. Uncle Bob wrote a book that I just, again, recently found out about, that it's called The Riverman, Ted Bundy and I Catch the Green River Killer. A link to any of the copies is down below, and it is on my reading list as of like now. I want to read it so bad. That is just mind-boggling to me. The more I'm researching about Uncle Bob, the deeper it gets, and I'm a true crime junkie. It's ridiculous. Well, Ted Bundy executed. His ashes are actually spread in the Pacific Northwest along the mountain range that we have. Like, I think it's in the Mount Rainier area. Lo and behold, Gary Ridgway was eventually caught, confessed to a lot of murders. Uncle Bob helped catch both of those. Now you're probably wondering, how am I connected to Uncle Bob? And I keep calling him Uncle Bob because that's what he asked us to call him. Well, he ended up getting his master's, not his master's, was it his doctorate at the University of Washington in police and crime studies. He was a season ticket holder to University of Washington football. He kind of rooted for both teams because if you didn't know, UW, University of Washington, and Wazoo, Washington State University, where he got his undergraduates and his masters, are the big rival schools in our state. My grandparents were season ticket holders to the college football as well, and that is where they met. They met the Keppels, him and his wife, at a game, and they formed a lifelong friendship. They used to come to my grandparents' barbecues all the time. He was just the sweetest. He would always sneak me extra sodas or extra pieces of cake or candy. He would always play with us. And I think this is the funniest. And when I was young, it didn't make sense because I was very young and I didn't know about serial killers, or I didn't even know better. But my grandparents used to give him, mostly my grandfather, used to give him a lot of crap about how long it took him to catch Bundy and how long it was taking him to catch Gary Ridgway. He used to give him the crap all the time. They just had this banter between each other. I have such fun memories. And that is literally what he asked us to call him, was Uncle Bob. We eventually moved from where we had been living to kind of the area where we're living now. We didn't get to go to a lot of my grandparents' barbecues. And the last time I saw Uncle Bob was actually at my grandmother's funeral. Even though I hadn't seen him in years. Well, okay, I mean, true, it was the last time I saw him before. That was my grandfather's funeral, but he knew exactly who I was. He asked me how school was going, and like that my grandparents always kept him up to date about what we were doing as people. I still find that amazing connection. And when I still wasn't super big into true crime, and when my grandmother passed, so the connection wasn't there. And it wasn't until I watched the Netflix docu-movie, The Shockingly Evil, with the Zac Efron, that I saw Robert Keppel in the credits, like, because he helped consult on the film as well. And I was like, why does that name say Uncle Bob? And then I started piecing everything together. I dedicate this video to Uncle Bob because he was a huge part in this realm of catching PNW, Pacific Northwest serial killers, and he did a lot of work past that. He started teaching crime studies and for multiple different colleges through tele-education. He also taught at the University of Washington and Seattle Pacific University, or maybe it was Seattle University, but he was very prolific in his field of work. I have one slight little puzzle piece that fits right in there now that I'm an adult. And so y'all know I am super into mental health, and I do see a counselor every other week to talk about what's going on up in here in this thingy. Lo and behold, my therapist, my counselor, did their student teaching and student rotation, whatever you want to call it, at Walla Walla State Penitentiary. Guess who's at Walla Walla State? You guessed it, Gary Ridgway. It wasn't, when Gary Ridgway was caught, they had, in Washington State, abolished the death sentence. So he is serving life in prison. In fact, Gary Ridgway is still alive at Walla Walla State. So my therapist, who was a student teacher, actually followed around her lead therapist to Mr. Ridgway's counseling sessions. Also would bring him art supplies during art time because he is considered like a safe inmate at the time. Why the work? And during these counseling sessions, you know, going back through like past traumas and stuff, he apparently did not like Uncle Bob. And I mean, so between those two connections, that I don't know, it's like 1 degree from Kevin Bacon and like 1 degree or 2 degrees from Ted Bundy. It's so weird to think about. Anyway, that is my spooky tale for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I never thought that I would be making something like this, but again, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This wasn't really a mental health video, so I'm not gonna say my little spiel, but have a great Halloween spooky season. I am so stoked. I mean, this is my life. I just live this every day. But if you're decorating and having fun, stay safe. Don't forget to hit that like, comment, and subscribe, because it really helps out the channel. And thank you guys for watching, and check out any links down below, and have a great spooky season. I'll see you next time. Bye. Homicide investigation.